take it. So
Yeah.
we'll go ahead and get rolling as people trickle in here. Thanks to everyone joining Derby City Agile Meetup. We have someone who I consider is in the Derby City Agile Hall of Fame joining us today as the
Woo!
one of my favorite people, but I'll let Anna get to that. Thank you all for joining. We're continuing to do virtual presentations as that works pretty well for us. We'll going forward still look to have maybe a few things in person throughout the year. I know Anna always has a crazy idea where she wants to do some sort of conference and we have to scramble and get everything together within a month, right? That usually happens every other year. So I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. But for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jay Brown. I work for Smart Data. We're an IT services company, help medium to large enterprise companies with custom software development and staff augmentation. So if you're looking to get rid of your crappy vendor that's not doing a good job, hit this guy up. So with further ado, actually, if you have any questions, please drop them in chat. I'll curate them during the presentation and we'll do Q&A at the end. And now the star of the show, Anna Kepshire.
Aw. Okay, I'm trying to hold back tears because I really miss you guys and I miss Louisville very much. So I'm Anna Kepshire. Jay and I founded this probably 5 years ago, and I've been blessed to work with Rick Mook for a number of years. I mean, he is an agile. He is so amazing. I don't even have the words to tell you how incredible Rick is. So it is a real treat to have Rick here. I mean, he's just, not only is he an amazing coach and leader, he is just an amazing all over person and funny and humorous and kind, and we love him so much. So it is a treat to have Rick. Rick, without further ado, oh, and I own KEP training. I had to plug that in. But without further ado, Rick Mook, here you are. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Anna. Thanks, Jay. Gosh, I feel like I've been oversold. So hopefully I don't disappoint too much in the next little bit. Yeah, I've got a few things to share with you all that are the outputs of some experiments that I've been doing for a couple of years now with various groups. Some of you may have seen parts of this before. I'm looking at Aaron and Will Magoon. Maybe I might have talked about this with your folks at some point. But this, file it under what we might call Scrum Plus, right? Practices that are complementary with the Scrum framework that you might want to try with your team. Doesn't hurt with Kanban either. So you can take this and see what you think. Try it out, and then let me know how it goes. As always. Little bit about Rick. Let's see. I work right now at a company called Vetro. We map fiber optic networks. We are the virtual home for the physical internet, is the catchphrase. And there's a lot going on with that right now. So we're very busy. It's a good part of the economy to be in at the moment with all the building of internet that's happening. But I also do some work with Anna's company with KEP training. So if you need some time with me, please feel free to reach out to me, reach out to Anna, and we'll be happy to get that arranged. So I call this visual planning. And the genesis of this, again, was a couple of years ago. I was reading the Scrum Guide, as I often do. Actually, it's not infrequent. It's about every month or two I go back and I look at that darn thing. And every time I read it, I find something that I smack myself up the head and say, wait a minute, I should be doing that instead. Or, gosh, I didn't realize this thing I've been wedded to was not in there at all. So it's a useful exercise. And if you haven't read the Scrum Guide lately, I'd encourage you to go do that. But the one that got me hung up about a year and a half, 2 years ago was this thing in sprint planning where it says the developers plan the work necessary to create an increment that meets the definition of done. And that word plan really got me all up in a tizzy. And I said to myself, gosh, I'm not doing that. It's a big old red problem there. Right. And this was obvious to me when we would run into problems. Usually at the end of the sprint, we'd start to encounter scrum butts. So if you're easily offended, watch out. I'm going to show you pictures of scrum butts now. Here's some of these scrum butts. But it went into testing last Wednesday. Or, but it's done in dev or local, right?
Keep going. I'm trying to make it.
But those data aren't in that environment. You ever heard that one before? Or, but we can't deploy that to production until ... And I'm sitting there, it's like day 8 of the sprint, and I'm thinking to myself, come on, team, you're better than this. How come we didn't think of this earlier? How come this didn't come up in sprint planning, right? Well, the answer is pretty obvious. It's because we weren't making a plan. We were making a list. And a list is not a plan. If there's one thing I'd like you to think about, maybe take away from this call today, it's that a list is not a plan. It's just a list. In my personal life, this comes up all the time. I used to think my wife was great at planning. Turns out she's not at all great at planning. What she's really, really good at is listing. And so there are all these lists, and most of the things never get done. Right? You've probably seen this elsewhere in your lives as well. So the first thing that I came up with and I tried with a team looked a lot like this. And you could call it, I think I called it at the time like an environment ladder, right? Because my team was having trouble deploying. They were having trouble moving things up cleanly and quickly into higher environments. Things would collect or get stuck in dev. They didn't have an integration environment. The product was too new and too small. It was one team working on one product. So it was simple platform here. But things would collect in dev, and then they'd try to do a big push to production, and it would get all janky, right? So I needed to teach them how to get things deployed smoothly and intentionally and frequently, above all, right? So they came up with this, I came up with this ladder, and everything starts down here in the local, and we just copy the Jira ticket, put it down there in the local, right? And then we draw lines with names on it to figure out, all right, who's going to move that up to the next environment, right? Who's going to be on that thing, right? Okay, Mike and Dave are going to take 1228 up into dev. Fantastic. Now, who's going to deploy that? Okay, well, Dave's going to deploy that. And so these are days here. You got day 1, day 2, day 3, right? Meanwhile, while Mike and Dave are over here, James and Polly are going to be working on 229. 229 is going to go up. We think it's going to happen day 2. And then, oh, Polly's going on vacation. How many times have you been on a team where you reached a critical juncture in the sprint, like something really important's happening for the whole sprint goal, and then the most important person for that thing has a dentist appointment or goes out of town for the day or whatever, right? It happens to the best of us, and you kick yourself and you think, oh gosh, as a scrum master, oh, I have failed. How did I not know this? How did I not manage that situation? Well, the key here is don't. The key is get the team to do it themselves by providing a visual tool like this, right? So this worked okay. This was all right. But eventually, the environment thing was less of an issue. Eventually, the team kind of figured that out. And they realized that they kind of knew how to get things into production. That problem was solved. What we needed now was just a way to coordinate the handoffs and the kind of gameplay aspect of this, right? Who's got the ball and which direction they're running. So then we moved on to this thing I'm going to call the flow diagram. This is version 2. And what you see here is a fairly straightforward software project. This is at the same company. What they're trying to do here is create a web form that a customer can put information into and then hit a button, and the form saves that information in a database. Could not be more simple, right? Turns out it's a little bit complicated. Why? because you've got these different parts to it, right? You've got, maybe there's a config that underlies the form, depending on which type of customer it is, right? Maybe there's API that needs to be able to act based on that configuration, return different elements for the UI, or accept different types of input, depending on what type of customer it is. And then, of course, there's building out the view and the form itself, right? So we had 3 different work streams happening here in day 1, and then in day 2, they were going to combine these. Now, at that point, this angelic human being, right, is going to descend from on high, and they're going to help us test. Why? Because they're a third party. They haven't been involved. So they're going to come in here and do some testing in dev, and we're going to do some bug fixing and merging and tweaking and yada, yada, yada. And then we think that's going to be done in day 3. And at that point, we're going to start wiring it up with a backend, right? Meanwhile, here comes a bug. Oh, this is a bug we've been waiting on for a while. It's been sitting in the backlog. Nobody wanted to do it. So after we get this work started, somebody in parallel is going to start working on this bug, and that's going to continue for a while. You can see this progress to the right. The team also went through and identified these checkpoints. You'll notice them here. These are all the key points in the sprint. These are points at which the team is saying to themselves in advance, during sprint planning, okay, on day 2, at the end of day 2, we're going to message each other in Slack. If this plan isn't working, we're going to know it then, and we're going to be able to adjust. We're going to say, okay, this whole thing needs to push out a day, which means this is going to affect our timelines, yada, 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 right? Same here with day 5. There's going to be a checkpoint there. We think this is a moment of truth for the sprint. If this is working out well here, then we continue. If not, we're going to replan. We're going to rework that. Often this is done at stand-up, which is honestly what stand-up is for. The output of stand-up is a better plan, right? So we noticed this was fine, right? It's fine to do this in sprint planning, but then what happens when things change? Well, in Miro, it's great. You just move down. So as it turned out, all was not well. As it turned out, this team's sprint did not go as planned. You'll see form saves info. Uh-oh, it did not get done on day 3 or 4. It continued into week 2. So here we are on day 6, and it's still going on, right? And then this thing came up with numeric fields. That's also a problem that occurred, right? And we had to delay the start of that bug work by a couple of days. So the team just shifted the whole thing down and replanned. And obviously they did that on Monday morning. Think about how useful this is for the retro. Think about how great it would be to have ready-made at the start of your retrospective a visual picture of what happened in the last sprint and when things went wrong, and specifically what changed, rather than having to rely on the developer's memories to go back and reconstruct that in a live meeting, right? This becomes an incredibly useful tool for reverse diagnosis, right? Observing behaviors, observing patterns, generating insights. This just becomes a really useful artifact for that. Okay, so this went fine. This is great. But then I went to a different company where things worked a little differently. The developers were more swim laned. They like to take things off into their hidey holes for a couple of days and work on them individually. And then they come back together and, you know, maybe do some code reviews or whatever, but it's a lot more parallelized. It's less collaborative than it was in this small company kind of primitive, agile, collaborative space, right? So you're not going to believe this. Yes, we created a Gantt chart. Who does this in Agile, right? It's not against the rules. Go look. The Scrum Guide says absolutely nothing about not using a Gantt chart. A Gantt chart can be a very powerful tool, right? Why? Because it calls out dependencies, it calls out timelines, it calls out critical path, it calls out risks. In fact, a Gantt chart is incredibly useful at the sprint level. And here's a really good example, right? Here you have these developers by name, each has their own lane, and they're figuring out how they're going to collaborate, right? And how the work is going to flow and when things are going to be tested versus developed. We can highlight the difference between tasks and stories and bugs. Creates a picture. We can block out PTO. Oh, look, nobody give Trevor anything in week 2. Why? Because he won't be there. And it makes it all clear and transparent. This was during the summer, so there was summer Fridays where half the day was off, so we could block that off, you know, and illustrate that for the team. And what's all this down here? Well, these are things that got pulled off of that diagram during sprint planning. So here's another useful output of this process. Once the team sits down and plans these things out one by one, they tend to notice that they're being overly optimistic about what they're going to achieve. They tend to realize, hey, wait a minute, we're not going to be able to have time to do file upload in dev and get it tested and get it deployed all in a day and a half. That's just not going to happen. There's too much work in that story. It's too big. So let's pull it out of the sprint. Right? It creates a more accurate, a safer, a more reliable picture for the team of what they think they're going to be able to achieve. All right, let's look at another one. Actually, let's go to the how-to here. So I've also written this up as a list because, you know, I know some of you like stepwise lists. So step 1, you get the blank thing together, you lay out your sprint, you put some day columns in there, and you're like, okay, what are we going to do first? What's our first bite? And you're going to get people popcorning, you know, the first 3 or 4 things, or 1 or 2 or whatever that the team's going to work on. Okay. And you put those up there and you say, okay, how long is that going to take? Really? Right? Oh, probably a day and a half. Okay. How about 2? All right. 2 days. Great. Draw a line, right? And then ask what happens next. This is the part that corrects for that initial problem that I had with all the scrum butts, right? Ask, okay, now we have this thing, it's done on your local. How does it get deployed? How does it get merged? Who's going to test it in dev? Do we have the data there that we need to test it in dev? Who's going to do the reviews? Who's going to drop off of something else and come in and help you with getting this merged into the code base? All those kinds of questions come up here in step 3. This is kind of your core ritual right here. It's a very repeatable cycle. And you just keep doing that, right? You keep doing that with each, I call it each bite, right? Team's going to take a first bite that, you know, represents their cycle time. If your team's cycle time is usually an average of 4 days, you can probably fit in 2 bites in a sprint, in a 2-week sprint, right? If your team's cycle time is 5 days, you'll be lucky to get into 2 complete bites in a sprint. If your team's cycle time is 3 days, you might have 3 bites, right? And it kind of shows. This is a 2-bite team. Their cycle time is 4 days. You can kind of tell by the look of it, right? Back here, this was a 3-bite team. And again, you can kind of tell there's 1, 2, 3 chunks in this sprint, right? So this is yet another reason to get your team cycle time down. Okay. So you repeat this cycle over and over again until you've populated the sprint. And then now you go back and you interrogate this thing. This is not the time to be pie in the sky optimistic about what's going to happen with your team. You ask yourself, what are the key moments or weak spots? Where would we look to know if this is going well? When can I go and see? This is one I learned from Kanban. When can I go and see? Not where, but when can I go and see if this plan is going as we expected it to? What would have to go well for this plan to work? What are we assuming? What's the biggest risk here? What are the stories that, gosh, if that doesn't work out, our sprint goal is really not going to work out. We might need to pivot or fail the sprint or whatever, right? So asking the team those questions enables them to put in checkpoints. It enables them to put in observations. It often results in things getting shifted. So, hey, instead of waiting for that risky thing to happen late in the sprint, let's move that earlier so we can get ahead of it. And if we're going to have a problem, we're going to find it out earlier. Right? So there's a risk reduction process that the team can engage in here. You got to teach them to be pessimistic. They're developers. They think they're amazing, and they are. They sometimes underestimate the challenges that they're going to face. So don't accept the clean version, right? Add some dirt to it. Get them to pretend that things are not going well, right? Get them to be pessimistic. Why? Because it's usually worse than we think it's going to be in sprint planning, at least in my experience, right? And then at the end, you pull the team. I do fist of 5. 1 is snowball's chance in hell of this thing ever working. And 5 is it's practically done. It's in the bag, right? And if I'm seeing 4s, 3s, and 4s, I'm probably okay. If I'm seeing 2s and 3s, then the next question, what would we need to change to make this plan more solid? What would we need to talk about or do to change those 2s and 3s to 3s and 4s? And again, you can do another round. So these days, my team spends about half of sprint planning in the visual plan. This is really where a bulk of the conversation goes during the ritual. Why? Because if we've done enough refinement going into this, we more or less understand what needs to happen, right? The sprint planning, therefore, is about making the plan, right? It's not just about making a better list. All right, one more thing I want to show you, and this, I don't know why I hadn't connected the dots on this. I actually figured this out yesterday as I was pulling together some of the images for this thing for you all. But I thought it was cool, so I'm going to share it. It's a little bit unfiltered. Did any of you know that Jira can do this for you? Like, there's the Gantt chart in Jira in the timeline view. And you can do dependencies. You can't put emojis like you can in Miro, but if you're looking for like an enterprise solution and your group uses Jira and doesn't have a Miro subscription or whatever, this isn't half bad. So just a hot take there. You might want to look at that if this is in your ecosystem. All right. So that's what I got. I'm happy to talk through questions or ideas or anything that any of you all want to bring to the table here. So, for Jay, if there's anything in the chat.
Yeah, there's not yet. One of the things if I think I'd be curious in, you had brought out in one of these screens, maybe it was like the second one you showed, where you pulled down, I think maybe you learned like what went wrong, right? Like that happened. So in this visual planning, like how do you take that information and move that in to the next sprint? Like how do you incorporate that?
How do you incorporate the lessons learned from this sprint into the next one? Yep,
yeah.
100%. That's the retro.
Yep.
Retro's all about that. So sometime right in here, right about, I don't know, let's pick a new color. Let's get blue going here. Sometime right around in here, last day of the sprint, after the sprint review, whole team's going to sit down and we're going to dig. We're going to look at some things that didn't go as well as we thought they would or think they should. And we're going to examine those in some detail and try to, in keeping with Derby Larson, our favorite guide to retrospectives, right? We're going to go in there and we're going to identify observations. We're going to identify some root causes. We're going to find some opportunities and some possible interventions to change those root causes. And then we're going to agree on essentially an experiment for the following sprint. If we don't leave everything to the last minute, with testing, maybe we can close issues sooner. Let's find out, right? And then we'll go and we'll run that experiment the following sprint. So that's the feedback loop for team function. And this becomes a really important artifact for that because it's like a travel diary of the team. It kind of provides a narrative of where we've been and what we ran into and what came up that forced us to change our plan. Is that kind of what you were asking about?
Yeah, and I wanted to, because of course, like, you know, the retro, obviously that's where we go, but how you specifically used the visual planning aspect of that. And I think you sort of capture it there. I am able to capture it in the same view, I think is what is sort of important to me, and that becomes an artifact. So, yeah, Laura, I see you have your hand raised if you want to unmute and ask away.
Thanks. Yes. So Rick, in looking at that list, and I have to admit I'm a list lover, those first 3 items on it look like refinement to me. And I'm wondering 2 things. One is, do you ever have separate refinement sessions? And if not, how long do your planning sessions take? Because refinement can take a while. I guess it depends on the size of the team and the number of stories that they're trying to put into the increment. But in general, how does that work for you?
100%. Yeah, I agree with you. Refinement is key going into this. If you're trying to do all of this from zero to plan for a whole sprint, you're looking at least an afternoon and possibly all day. So the teams that I work with tend to have a rolling refinement rhythm, right? It'll be like every Tuesday, but after stand-up, or every Thursday at 3:30 p.m. when everyone's done thinking anyway, or whatever, right? Like done solving those kinds of problems, if you know what I mean, right? So they'll have a rhythm. They do that. It's even with that, though, when we start getting down to brass tacks and we say, okay, what's Bob gonna do first? Like, what's that guy gonna do, right? Oh, well, I guess all of a sudden it's like they've never seen these things before, right? Even if you've assigned them during refinement, which I've seen teams do, right? They'll look at the list in the sprint and they'll pick something that's like halfway down. And I'll realize, like, oh my gosh, because here's another fun thing about Scrum. Once things get put in the sprint backlog, how and in what order the team does them is no longer necessarily determined by value, because we're driving for the sprint goal as the increment, right? So product isn't in pure rarefied Scrum, product isn't going to come in and say, well, I want you to do this story first and then that story second and then that story. No, it's an increment. It's a whole increment that the team is driving to in an ideal state. So we want to leave them the flexibility to pick what's first and what's second and what's third. Why? Because often that can get some double wins or some triple wins or avoid conflicts or problems during the development process. So asking this question in planning, again, even though we've talked through in an abstract sense, what are the testing criteria? Yeah, okay. Is this relative to this other thing? Is this, a 2 or a 5? Or okay, so we've had some of those conversations. But asking them again, once we're talking about real people on the field, moving the ball in a direction, it's like it's a whole new thing for them, which is kind of cool to see. Oh, you're muted.
When I hate it when people do that. Sorry, I just did it myself. Are you muted? With people not prioritizing in the sprint backlog, though, because there can be obviously technical dependencies, et cetera. So if people are picking something from the middle, wouldn't you or they move it to the top so that there is still an ordered list, or are you just leaving it in the middle? I wasn't clear on that.
You can, if it makes you happier, sure.
As a list person, it would make me happier. Yeah.
Well, then do it.
Okay.
Live your dream.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that would be lovely, wouldn't it? Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah. Thanks for the question. That's a great question. Yeah, it's a classic case of like context is everything, right? You can talk about this in the abstract, but then once you get down to who's going to do what, all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, wait a minute, whoa. We're doing this now, huh? Okay. Yeah.
And there was a question from Ryder. Ryder, feel free to unmute yourself if you want to add some clarity here, but is it a Gantt or is it more of a hybrid Kanban, swim lane, and Gantt?
Yeah, good question, Ryder. I got to give it a shout out to Ryder. Ryder was leading Code Louisville when I did that program, and that's what got me into this whole field. So thank you and shout out to my old buddy Ryder. Okay, so yes, I mean yeah, you could call it. It's a lot more Gantt-y than the sprint backlog that we're used to using. So that's why I gave it that label. But you can call it a ham sandwich. It does the same, you know.
Yeah.
It does the thing.
Yeah. No, I only bring it up because it's just kind of interesting just to help me kind of pull together the various elements. So you have the kind of responsibility and flow of the swim lane, the state of the Kanban, and just kind of the defining dates of a Gantt and flow into Gantt. And so yeah, just capturing a bunch of different elements of the various
yeah. And this end to beginning relationship here, which I think is pretty cool. Yeah. Like, and initially I've lost access to this board and I'm kicking myself. The very first one of these that I did, it was a version of this. It was super, super ugly. Can't emphasize how ugly it was, because what I did was I copied and pasted the whole thing every day for stand up with like a green check mark on the things that worked well. Like I go through and do this on the things that were done the way we thought they were going to be done. And then I go through and put like a big red X on the things that didn't work the way we thought they would. And it just, I mean, it was completely indecipherable. And it was also like 5 screens tall by the end of a 2-week sprint. So eventually we moved to this kind of hybrid version of that. But this is most of my teams, and I don't steer them this way necessarily, but most of them wind up doing something like this now, for what it's worth.
No, I mean, I do like it. It's having seen what having even less structure than this, and I think it may be just a function of the sophistication or experience of the team. You may need to put some more structure around it to make sure it's not a lot of waiting around to see what's next.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Ryder. A less mature team is really going to struggle to do this well, because there are too many unknowns and they don't know how each other work. They don't speak the same language yet. So just, be acutely aware of that is my advice if you're doing this with a newer team. Yeah. It's like Will's got his hand up.
Yeah. Hey, Rick. So kind of along the same lines, how do you, in general, update this type of a plan as you go along? I know you said you're trying to capture, the original plan and kind of the things that went wrong with it for retros. So what kind of updates do you make, and what kind of updates do you try not to make?
Yeah, that's great. I still do this in Miro because I can draw on it and the team can draw on it. Like literally take a pen and draw. So this is a good example here where the team just lassoed some things, copied them, pasted them down below. Like I think this arrow here is a direct copy of that one there. I think they're the same thing, right? And then you can just modify the picture down below the first picture, and that gives you a record of both. So things that we've drawn in before, I've even gone to the point of being like, oh yeah, Bob got sick. poor Bob. So we'll grab, let's see. There's an ambulance. There we go. Poor Bob. All right. That's Bob's ambulance. And now we have a record of that. Poor Bob had an accident on day 9, right? Or, you know, pet, you can put your pet sticker on there, like such and so had to go to the vet, an emergency vet visit, kind of threw the sprint off for us. It's not anyone's fault. It's just what happened. And now we remember when we come back in the retro that, oh yeah, that was the day that such and so had their pet in the hospital, and we're glad the pet's doing better. And the point of that is twofold. The most important reason for that is to enable the team to make a better plan, because the old plan, right, the one that's up here, is no longer directly relevant. So it's time for us to make a new one. And that's going to be the one that's down here. That's going to be more relevant to our situation. Another way to put this that might be helpful is anytime we're creating one of these or modifying it, we're doing it with a mindset that based on what we know now, this is what we think will happen. So we're not committing to this plan necessarily. And we're not saying that this is the future. This is saying that it's like a feasibility study, saying based on what we know now, this is where we think things are going to go. And if that reality turns out not to be the future, right? If we get to the future and it's not what we thought it would be, then guess what? We can sit down and do the same thing again. If that's not agility, I don't know what is. Right?
So you might keep going down, you know, yet another level, I guess, if you have to.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah, you could do. Okay, but yeah,
Oh,
that
yeah.
makes a lot of sense. So keep the top
100%.
similar,
Yeah.
and then just move the new plans down to lower levels and keep going. Yeah. Awesome.
100%. And a normal team in the course of a normal sprint, in my experience, will do this once or twice in a sprint. They'll have one or two things where, gosh, we got to midweek, it just did not work the way we thought it was going to be. This isn't matching at all anymore. This is stupid. Let's just redo the plan. And then they'll pull down what they have left and try again underneath. That's normal. That's just the joy of Scrum.
Juliana?
Juliana,
Hey Rick, good to see
hey,
you.
it's been
Thanks for
ages.
this. Yeah, this is great. I have a couple questions, but I'm wondering, have you tried this at a higher level than just the sprints? Like, are you able to do this like a few sprints in advance so teams are refining work for the next sprint?
Yes, we do this at the epic level as an org. And we put the 1 to 2 sprint chunks in a quarterly board that has, for each quarter, sprint 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 and 6 off to the right. And we'll lay that out. Actually, these days I do that in Jira because the timeline view lets you drag and drop beginning and end of epics. And that's the version I use. And then as that timeline shifts, pull and push, adjust. Gosh, you know, since SSO is taking us an extra 2 sprints, we now know that mobile app is going to come not in quarter 4, but sometime in quarter 1. So it enables us to communicate more proactively and more accurately based on what we know now, right? With our stakeholders and with product, et cetera. So you can totally do this at the meta level. Yes.
I had one more question. Does someone else have their hand up?
Yeah, go for it.
I was wondering, how have developers responded, especially at first, to the question, how long will this take?
Right. Yeah. And this is maybe where Laura's question earlier comes into play. I use a method of refinement that's very, in a way it's loose. It's not quantitative at all. I get the team to refine things down to the point where, based on what we know now, each item is small enough. Meaning it's probably going to take us 1 to 3 days. And I stop there. Once I get its relative effort down to below that of another item that took 1 to 3 days that they know and understand, we just do direct comparison, bigger, smaller, or about the same. If it's about the same or smaller, it's small enough and we're done talking. If it's bigger, then we need to split it. So I can count on just about everything, unless I pull it into the sprint and the developer says, this one is really, really tiny. Don't make this 3 days. All I do is drag it in and make it 3 days. And then that's probably about right.
Okay, so if you're getting like the rough estimate from the team, does that let you get this day by day plan, or do you then like check in after the 3rd day for any ticket? Like I'm wondering like how much wiggle room is there?
Yeah, we check in. I mean, obviously we check in every day at stand up. And this often is shown during stand up just to check and see, right? I have a really good example in play right now, actually, where there was a zombie snake, a story that had been through a couple of sprints previously and probably should be, stabbed in the heart and buried or something, right? And it's like the undead story that will never die, and the developer was saying, I'm almost there. It's gonna be like a day and a half. And I looked at him and I was like, this is my unbelieving face. Right? And I said, let's just make it 3. Let's just pretend it's going to be 3. Why? Because if it turns out to be 2, you'll look really good. And then they're like, okay, all right, I'll take that. And guess what? It turned out to be 2. And so now he looks really good. And if we'd gone with his original day and a half, he would have had egg on his face. So there's a little bit of psychology involved here. Training the team to be pessimistic is a real challenge. It's a real challenge.
Laura, did you have another question?
I do, yes, thank you. I'm going to imagine that you can't actually demo live that feature in Jira because it would be proprietary information, but can you describe how to get to that feature? Like what's I'm between gigs right now, so I can't even get into Jira to test this myself.
I got you. Yeah, I'll help you out. And if you want to link up at some point, you can reach out and I can walk you through it one-to-one.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks.
It's fairly easy. Over on the left in Jira, you're going to see a menu that allows you to select what board you're looking at in the project. And that also allows you to select the sprint in progress or the backlog view. And then up above those two is this link called timeline view. And
I've never even noticed it.
Yeah, it's hiding right there in plain sight. Atlassian's documentation has all this spelled out. And by the way, I'm in Jira Cloud. So if you're in some older on-prem version of Jira, you might not have this. I do, but I don't know. Atlassian's documentation has details on all of this too.
Okay, great. Thank you.
But you click that view and then it will show you all of your epics. And depending on how you have your project and your board configured, you can click in timelines for those epics. And you can expand the epics to show all of the stories inside and assign timelines and dependencies to those as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huh. Thank you. That's great. I'm sorry if everybody else already knew this, but
I
had never heard of it before.
Hiding right there.
In plain sight. Thank you.
Yeah, in plain sight. Yeah, good question. Other questions or thoughts or anything?
And anybody, feel free to ask general questions. Rick loves just talking about whatever you throw at him.
My wife says I'm not allowed to talk about college, sports, or religion. So with that caveat.
Yeah.
So is the reason that list doesn't get done is because it's the honey-do list and you don't do the stuff, or because she doesn't do the stuff? That's what my big question.
Dear Laura, I will say yes and grit my teeth.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah.
We show her the part that where you say that she's not a good planner.
Yeah, no, we're not going to film that.
Okay.
That would cause that would be cause for a difficult retrospective, Anna. we're not gonna do that. We're gonna let the natural consequences of things emerge, and it'll all work out. Yeah. So okay, hopefully this is useful, helpful. There is let me go ahead and share a couple of things here. I did write this up with basically the same list of how-to steps. And so if you want to see that, I'll pull up a link to the article here. And you can go right here. You can also reach out to me. Here, I'll put it in chat. Where's my chat?
And we can make this available to the group, right, Rick?
Yeah, go right ahead. You can also reach me at, richard.mook at gmail. And I'm, happy to email with folks. Also happy to come out and work with a team. If you want to do a session using this method, it can be pretty fun and transformative for the team. Kind of a different level of team ownership. My favorite way of doing it is in Miro. My favorite way of doing it is with Post-its and a whiteboard, which is really, Miro, but the original. So if you want to do something in person or virtual, I'm happy to help with that.
Rick, so when you say kind of lead with pessimism, when there's a developer or really a team member that is very pessimistic, do you kind of balance that out though? Or
yeah, good question.
because I think if you tell someone who's pessimistic to be even more pessimistic.
Yeah, and again, this is a team maturity issue, right?
Okay.
You're if you're in an environment where folks have been burned in the past, they've given an estimate and then they've turned out to have been burned by that. They will be very reluctant to commit to anything. Honestly, this isn't really the tool to solve that problem with. You would run into that problem here pretty quickly, and that's one for the retro. In fact, you could do something more mechanical to get around that problem. If you can get them to estimate things down to small enough, you could give everything a 3-day pretend size and give that a shot and use that to get the team moving while you address the underlying issues of trust. Because that's really that's not a process problem. That's not a tool problem. That's the human trust problem. So that's where one would need to really put the energy and the effort.
Very good.
Oh, you're welcome, Michelle.
Aw.
Good stuff.
Anyone else?
Me at all or anybody. My team trusts no one.
Yeah. And you can get into some interesting situations. Some teams keep this private. Some teams keep their visual plan to themselves and they don't put it out there. Again, that's a bright flag that you have a trust issue in the org, and solving that as a long-term proposition involves tremendous amounts of work, as some people I've worked with here can attest. But it's worth it if you can get that turned around, start building trust, and nothing builds trust like victory. So if you can find a way for your team to deliver a thing the way they said they were going to deliver that thing, boy howdy, that'll do it. That'll get you on the right path. I'm a big believer in victory through delivery.
Ellen, did you have a question?
I didn't have a question, but I feel like I do my task in my calendar and I have one for home maintenance for Rick. And this really, really helped me because I just spread all the things I have to do across the year. So every week there's a couple that I have to do because I feel like maintenance is the key to everything. And we always skip that. And I bet every person here is a workaholic. That's all I do is work. And I forget, I need to change that furnace filter.
True.
Just little things. And maintenance to relationships, Friday night, date night, whatever it is, everything has to be maintained. That's a secret. And when we do these projects, you need to incorporate something around the office we can maintain and to build camaraderie and also to maintain it. So we have a sense of being on the team besides just writing this one code.
Yeah.
It's too much.
Yep.
That's just my little take. Thank you very much, Rick. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, you're most welcome. Thank you all for coming. And yeah, again, happy to follow up with folks if you need.
And I love that, Ellen. I think that it's, we talk about it a lot of time, how the things that we put in practice every day, Agile and Scrum can be applied to so many different things, not just the projects that we're working on. So that's good stuff. Nobody has any other questions. I think we'll give everybody back 7 minutes. I'll try to get this up recorded, uploaded by the end of the day. And Anna, if you want to take us out, go for it.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. I'm so glad to see so many familiar faces. And Rick, you always leave us with things to ponder and think about. And there's always so much great information. So we love you and thank you so much. And I'm sure I'm going to be asked for the deck as well as the link to the article and the video. So we'll get those out to people so you can share with your teams because, we know we this is valuable information and I think it was great. So thank you, Rick. And thank you, everybody. We missed you. And we'll try to do these more often because we really love our group and we love our community. So thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.
And hold on a sec.
Oh boy. Here
Which,
comes the celebrity.
I mean, we couldn't get away without Anna showcasing a dog.
No, it's got to have the dog.
We tried so hard, Rick.
And here's Louis, named for Louisville.
Louis. Good to see
Louis,
you.
it was Sprint, but people not in the Agile community were really puzzled with the name. So we had a name change. Thank you, everyone.
Good to see you.
Good seeing everyone.
Bye, guys.
Later.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.